Imagine a world where a single sentence in a diplomatic document could tip the balance of power for half the planet. In May 2025, behind closed doors in Moscow, leaders of China and Russia quietly erased a few critical words from a joint agreement, a decision with massive implications for Japan, the United States, and the entire Indo-Pacific region. What were these hidden words, and why did deleting them send ripples through global capitals from Washington to Tokyo? Tonight, we pull back the veil on a rapidly shifting triangle of power and technology, where every move is a gamble and every handshake tells a deeper story. Let's rewind. Just weeks ago, under the glare of international cameras, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin smiled, shook hands, and signed what looked like another routine document. Yet the world's top diplomats were on edge. What did it really say? And more crucially, what did it deliberately leave unsaid? To understand why this moment matters, we need a crash course in a tangled alliance that is part history, part rivalry, and part economic necessity. For decades, the relationship between China, Russia, and Japan has resembled a high-stakes chess game played across generations. Imagine three neighbors locked by history, resource needs, and absolutely no trust. Japan, for example, is still technically at war with Russia. Tokyo and Moscow have never signed a peace treaty after World War II, all because of four small islands, the Northern Territories to Japan, the Southern Kurils to Russia, snow-capped, windswept, and soaked in centuries-old bitterness. Each year, the dispute flares up anew, feeding nationalist sentiment and political posturing on both sides. China and Japan? That's another story, a long, thorny history stretching back to the violence of the Second Sino-Japanese War, through territorial tussles over the Senkaku, or Diaoyu Islands, all the way to today's sharp competition for technology and influence. And yet, in a twist that feels almost ironic, China is Japan's largest trading partner. They can't afford to trust each other, but nor can they afford to stop talking. Russia and China, meanwhile, have grown closer in recent years, especially since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine triggered Western sanctions. Their bond is pragmatic. Russia provides oil, gas, and raw materials. China brings investment, technology, and, increasingly, diplomatic cover. Both see themselves as bulwarks against U.S. power, determined to rewrite the rules of the regional order. All three countries are shaped by more than strategy. They're shaped by history, pride, and perhaps most of all, by what their people believe. Surveys show that over 90% of Japanese view China unfavorably. In China, public sentiment toward Japan still bristles with memories of conflict. These attitudes are not just background noise, they're political fuel, limiting leaders' room for compromise and amplifying every diplomatic slight. But the triangle isn't just about rivalry, it's about economics too. Japan's economy is deeply intertwined with China's, despite their friction. Japan cannot pass up China's massive market to sustain economic growth, says Kazuto Suzuki from the Institute of Global Affairs. At the same time, China's growth, an impressive 5.3% in Q1 2025, is propelling demand for Russian energy. In fact, Russia's oil exports to China jumped 15% in just the first few months of this year, a lifeline for Moscow as Western sanctions bite ever harder. Meanwhile, Japan is feeling the pressure militarily. Its defense budget is up another 2% this year, targeting especially its naval capabilities, while its public debt now soars to 266% of GDP, the highest among developed nations. Tensions drive spending, which in turn increases tension, a cycle that's hard to break. Then there's the Western factor. For Japan, the U.S. alliance is the pillar of security, and Washington watches every Moscow-Beijing move with hawk-like attention. Japan is in a tough neighborhood. Its allies need to stand up to China, warns U.S. envoy George Glass. Yet even within these alliances, fault lines are emerging. Japan's trade surplus with the U.S. just shrank by 10% as it imports more and more, while simultaneously signing a new digital partnership with the European Union to keep its tech edge sharp. The world is shifting rapidly, and alliances once considered ironclad are showing cracks. And in the background, pieces move on the board. China and Russia held joint naval exercises in the Sea of Japan just this March, sending unmistakable signals. Meanwhile, Russia and North Korea are drawing closer militarily, and China's influence in Southeast Asia is rising sharply, fueled by a 25% jump in green energy investments. It's not just posturing, it's an arms race, a tech race, an influence race all at once. So, Why did Xi and Putin choose, with such care, to quietly cut particular phrases from their May joint statement? Diplomatic sources reveal the answer. The initial draft made reference to maintaining the security of Northeast Asia, diplomatic code for joint military activity near Japan. It also flirted with supporting Chinese investment in Russian-held islands that Tokyo fiercely claims. Both passages were erased at Beijing's insistence. Why? Because even as tensions rise with the U.S., Beijing wants to avoid pushing Japan, America's key ally, even closer into Washington's arms. Here's the drama. China is walking a geostrategic tightrope. On one hand, it seeks a rock-solid partnership with Russia to oppose Western pressure. On the other, it desperately needs to keep economic channels open with Japan and avoid sparking a military escalation at its doorstep. In the words of Masayuki Masuda from the National Institute for Defense Studies, deeper Beijing-Moscow military collaboration could trigger a backlash from Japan, the U.S., and South Korea. Russia, for its part, would relish the chance to needle Japan further and maybe lock in new Chinese investments for itself. But China said no. The invisible hand of economic logic is at work. Antagonizing Japan could do more harm than good. That's not the only reason. Chinese leaders are acutely aware of the power of symbolism and memory in Asia. One misstep could ignite nationalist outrage both abroad and at home, and yet they also cannot appear weak to their own domestic audiences or to Washington. But this balancing act is growing shakier by the day. Japan's military buildup, rising technology races, the sixth-generation fighter jet project with the EU is just one example, and new infrastructure like the planned China-Russia high-speed rail, set for 2027, are raising the stakes. The U.S. is laser-focused on the region, ramping up support for Japan and South Korea. Every move echoes. Every word, written or deleted, carries consequences. Layer on top of this, the relentless pace of technological change. As Europe and Japan push to out-innovate China in next-generation fighter jets, China steps up its own investments in AI, quantum, and green energy, while Russia focuses its resources on keeping up militarily, projecting strength with an ever larger portion of its GDP. Military spending is headed for 7% by next year. And the public? In Japan, polls now show 90% harbor negative views of China. In China, citizens are just as wary of Japan, if not more. Leaders in both countries know that high-profile confrontations, even symbolic ones, can spiral quickly. The recent jailing of a Japanese citizen in Shanghai for espionage only stoked the fire. Domestic politics are now inextricably linked to foreign maneuvering. Meanwhile, in May's joint statement, a single phrase made it through, urging Japan to draw lessons from the atrocious crimes it committed and to be cautious in its words and deeds regarding historical questions. A reminder that history is never really past in East Asia. It's a weapon, wielded when needed, but dangerous to both sides. It's a dizzying dance. Economic logic versus military pressure, public sentiments versus diplomatic nuance, historical wounds versus the needs of tomorrow. And yet, the world saw only a handshake, a photo op, a piece of paper with a few bland paragraphs. Behind the scenes, however, the erasure of a single line may have bought a few months of calm, or simply delayed the next crisis. So here's the burning question. Can this uneasy triangle of power, money, and memory hold its balance as the tech race accelerates and military alliances harden? Or are we witnessing the quiet prelude to a storm that could reshape Asia's and the world's future? As we look beyond these headlines and the carefully negotiated joint statements, the question at the heart of Northeast Asia's strategic triangle remains. Can China, Russia, and Japan maintain their fragile balance? Or are we heading toward a tipping point that could reshape the region and even the world? Let's peer into the future, guided by expert insights, economic data, and the unpredictable force of public sentiment. Imagine a scenario where the China-Russia partnership continues to deepen, fueled by shared grievances against the West and mutual economic benefit. With Russia's oil exports to China up by 15% in early 2025, and the two planning an ambitious high-speed rail link by 2027, their economic interdependence is only set to grow. Add to this the expansion of joint military exercises, like the March 2025 naval drill in the Sea of Japan, and it's clear that their partnership extends far beyond clever word choices in joint statements. In such a future, Japan faces stark choices. Already, Tokyo has ramped up its defense budget by 2%, focusing on naval power and next-generation fighter jets in collaboration with Europe. As China and Russia draw closer, Japan may double down on its alliance with the US and the EU, investing even more in military readiness and advanced technology. But this path has risks. An arms race could quickly spiral, with each move by one side prompting countermoves by the other. It's a classic security dilemma, and, as Professor Masayuki Masuda warns, deeper Beijing-Moscow military collaboration could trigger a backlash from Japan, the US, and South Korea. But let's not overlook the subtler possibilities. What if China, wary of fighting too many battles at once, continues to soften its stance toward Japan? Beijing's decision to omit references in its joint statement with Russia is not just diplomatic theater. It's a signal that China, facing a tense rivalry with Washington, wants to avoid opening another front with Tokyo. After all, China and Japan are deeply economically intertwined. Even as political tensions simmer, Japan relies on access to China's vast market to sustain its growth, despite public debt now reaching a staggering 266% of GDP. Kazuto Suzuki of the IOG puts it bluntly, Japan cannot pass up China's massive market to sustain economic growth. If both countries prioritize prosperity, we could see a phase of cautious rapprochement, with economic cooperation outpacing military posturing. Joint renewable energy projects, new trade agreements, and advances in digital infrastructure, like Japan's recent digital partnership with the EU, could become the new front lines, trading tension for competition in commerce and technology. Of course, all of this could shift in an instant if Washington changes its tune. Suppose the U.S. seeks détente with either China or Russia. Improved U.S.-Russia ties could loosen the Sino-Russian embrace, opening diplomatic space for Japan, or a sudden U.S.-China thaw could leave Japan recalibrating its alliances, perhaps even feeling isolated despite decades of partnership. Don't discount the unpredictable. Political shifts at home. A more nationalist Japanese government could take a harder line on territorial disputes, especially the Northern Territories' Southern Kurils standoff with Russia, or the sensitive Senkaku Diaoyu Islands clash with China. Meanwhile, a changing of the guard in Beijing or Moscow could bring fresh perspectives, or harden the status quo. Yet beneath these high-level maneuvers lies a powerful undercurrent, public opinion. In Japan, polls report that 90% of citizens view China unfavorably, a sentiment that's echoed by unease on the Chinese side. Domestic audiences, fueled by nationalist media, exert real pressure on their leaders, making diplomatic compromise difficult and raising the risk that minor incidents, an airspace infringement, a maritime standoff, an espionage case like the recent jailing of a Japanese citizen in Shanghai, could escalate with astonishing speed. And then, there is the silent but fierce race for technological supremacy. As China and Russia tighten military cooperation, Japan is accelerating efforts with Europe on a sixth-generation fighter jet, an arms race not just in ships and planes, but in AI, cyber capabilities, and space technology. The outcome of this contest will determine who sets the rules in Northeast Asia for decades to come. All these possibilities should spark a sense of urgency in anyone watching the region. But what does it mean for you, the viewer? Why should a delicate dance among distant capitals matter in your daily life? First, because the flow of goods, ideas, and resources from this region touches nearly every aspect of our interconnected world. From the microchips in your smartphone to the cars on city streets, supply chains and innovation often start in East Asia. Any disruption, whether from conflict, sanctions, or shifting alliances, can send shockwaves across global markets, impacting jobs, prices, and even security in distant countries. Second, the story of China, Russia, and Japan is a vivid case study in the art of strategic balance. It shows how nations navigate history's scars and today's ambitions, juggling economic survival with national pride and security. Watching how these countries calibrate risk, communicate, or conceal their intentions, and respond to pressure can teach businesses, policymakers, and ordinary people vital lessons in negotiation, resilience, and crisis management. Consider the power of words. The mere deletion of a phrase in a joint statement, no tanks, no tariffs, just a few sentences, can cool tensions and buy precious time. Smart diplomacy still matters, even in an age of hypersonic missiles and cyber warfare. For students of international relations, investors, and anyone curious about how history's big chessboard works, this triangle offers a live demonstration. Alliances are rarely set in stone. Economic ties can outweigh old animosities, but the legacy of past wars is never far below the surface. It's a reminder that the world is neither fully stable nor eternally doomed. Outcomes hinge on human choices, sometimes made in back rooms as much as on the battlefield. There's a lesson, too, for navigating your own challenges. Like the leaders in Beijing, Moscow, and Tokyo, you may find yourself balancing conflicting interests, security versus opportunity, principle versus pragmatism. Learning when to stand firm, when to compromise, and when to change the subject entirely is as useful in personal negotiations as in global strategy. Now let's return to the question we posed at the beginning. Can the delicate balance in the China-Russia-Japan triangle hold, or are we on the edge of a dangerous new era? The answer, as always, is not set in stone. The evidence points both ways. On the one hand, economic logic and the potential costs of conflict urge caution on all sides. China needs stability to drive its post-pandemic recovery. Remember, its economy just posted a healthy 5.3% growth in early 2025. Japan, facing a record public debt burden and an aging society, can ill afford disruptions. Russia, despite saber-rattling, depends heavily on Chinese trade amidst Western sanctions. But the warning signs are real. Joint sea patrols, spiraling defense budgets, and fierce rhetoric signal that the trust deficit is still deep. The growing entanglement with North Korea and the U.S. alliances further complicate any simplistic narrative about stability. So, can the balance hold? In the short term, most signs suggest the answer is yes, but only barely. Diplomacy, economic self-interest, and fear of uncontrollable escalation are keeping a lid on conflict for now. Yet, the situation is volatile. A single miscalculation or a surge of nationalist fervor could unravel years of careful maneuvering in days, maybe even hours. Crucially, the missing phrases in that joint statement reveal not just what leaders want to say, but what they fear could ignite the powder keg. Sometimes, what goes unsaid matters more than what's declared at a podium. Here's a secret fact the news rarely highlights. Even as these three countries appear locked in rivalry, there are quiet channels of dialogue, track 2 diplomacy, back-channel talks, research exchanges that continue beneath the surface. While the public face is tension and competition, behind the scenes, there are tireless efforts by diplomats, scholars, and business leaders working to prevent misunderstandings and find common ground. These rarely make headlines, but they are often the difference between crisis and compromise. For you, the lesson is to read between the lines, question the obvious, and appreciate the invisible threads that keep the global order from unraveling. In geopolitics, as in life, balance is never permanent. It's a process, one that demands vigilance, flexibility, and sometimes the courage to leave certain things unsaid. If you found these insights valuable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What scenario do you see brewing in Northeast Asia? Are you optimistic that peace will be preserved, or do the risks outweigh the opportunities?